Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you are very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. We're going to be continuing our exploration of gynecological history today. Last time we took a look at menstruation. I will be leaving that video linked, but I'm also going to create a playlist that I can continue to add to over the next few months as well. As I was inspired to create this particular series when I found myself considering how my current experience of being pregnant might compare with an historical experience, it feels only right to discuss the understanding that our early modern counterparts had about how, and indeed when, to get pregnant. Let's take a look at it. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that I don't need to provide you all with a detailed explanation of what people need to do with each other to make a baby, especially as, for the most part, the process and activity required hasn't changed over the centuries. Except, of course, there is now the additional support that modern medical science and technology can offer to those who are trying to get pregnant and who may, perhaps, be finding the process more difficult than expected. Some of these techniques I did use myself on my own motherhood journey, on both occasions when falling pregnant. Perhaps people might try tracking their menstrual cycles, maybe with an app, in an attempt to identify their more fertile days. Maybe they'll look to tracking their basal body temperature to see when they might be ovulating. You could use ovulation test strips. You might take medications to increase fertility. There are surgical interventions that can help. And/or there is assisted conception through either intrauterine insemination, known as IUI, and/or in vitro fertilization, known as IVF. In the 21st century, with our understanding of the process of conception, and in particular, how to create the best chance of it taking place, timing is everything. However, the same can also be said about conception during the early modern period. The most conspicuous factor instructing the timing of conception then was perhaps a moral one that stemmed from the expectations of the church. It was, for example, expected that pregnancy should only occur within a marriage. Children born out of wedlock, and their unwed mothers, and indeed their fathers, if they could be identified, were often figures of public ridicule or chastisement. Mothers and children may be ostracised by their families and left to fend for themselves. For the majority of those who found themselves in that position, they would be dependent on their parish for support, and thus they would be funded by members of their local community, which I think potentially would only have served to increase the local animosity that could be directed towards them. Of course, as is so often the case, there are rarely hard and fast rules that apply to everyone and everything. There were, after all, notable examples of illegitimate children being acknowledged by proud and prominent fathers. Henry VIII and his son Henry Fitzroy are, I think, perhaps the most famous example of this. Fitzroy's royal father ensured that his boy was well cared for, educated and ennobled. Fitzroy's mother, Elizabeth Blount, entered into a respectable marriage. Her husband Gilbert received profitable lands and grants. In most cases, though, an illegitimate child would be rendered unable to inherit their father's estate, and certainly their claim would be inferior to that of any legitimate child that had been born to the father. Prospective parents did, however, have other timings to consider. Church rules stated that people should abstain from sex with their spouse during the 6.5 weeks of Lent, during the roughly 4 weeks of Advent, and the 8 days of the octave of Pentecost. For those keeping track, that does make at least 11 weeks out of the year of 52 where a married couple could not attempt to conceive a child. Added to this, during the roughly 41 weeks remaining, were expectations of abstinence for the days preceding other significant holy days, those before a person took communion, and also on Wednesdays, Fridays and Sundays. Based on this, I did some, frankly, very rudimentary sums. And my rough guesstimation is that according to these prohibitions on sex that are based upon the liturgical calendar and other church rules, there were only, at best, 160 days scattered across the year in which married couples were permitted to even try to conceive. And of course, any sex act that occurred between a married couple that could not feasibly result in conception was prohibited too, as were certain sexual positions. Thus, according to the Church, legitimate, permissible sex occurred only in the bed of a married couple, in the missionary position, and on permitted dates. Considering, though, what we know now about ovulation and fertile windows, it is, to me at least, frankly fairly extraordinary that many conceptions even occurred. Considering, though, that they did, and considering that there were certainly babies that were born around 40 weeks after the middle of Lent and or Advent, I do think it might be fair to argue that these particular prohibitions were observed loosely at best. Additionally, somewhat confusingly, maybe contrarily, the Church did also instruct married couples to go forth and be fruitful. On occasion, this would even lead to religious intervention, with instructions being given to prevent certain acts of piety in wives. For example, when the Pope was informed that Katherine of Aragon displayed such a, quote, fervour of her devotion in her holy oaths and prayers, fasting and abstinence and pilgrimage, that she risked damaging her ability to conceive and carry children both at the time and in the future. The Pope was concerned. Indeed, Pope Julius responded to this particular report with a letter in which he pointed out that as a married woman, Catherine did, quote, not have the full power of her own body. Instead, that the devotions and fasting of the wife, if they are thought to stand in the way of her physical health and the procreation of children, can be revoked and annulled by men. The Pope gave Catherine's husband authority over her in these matters, ruling that, quote, she may not, without your permission, observe these devotions and prayers and fasting and abstinence and pilgrimage and any other project of hers that would stand in the way of the procreation of children. Her husband could, the Pope wrote, quote, hinder and prevent her if she attempts to go against your prohibition from the observation of these things. Catherine could, therefore, be compelled, perhaps even physically forced, away from her faith observances in order to protect her own body's capacity to conceive and bear children. Like us, then, our medieval and early modern counterparts recognised the value of a sufficient diet, both before and after conception, in order to generate the best chance of creating a healthy baby. And certainly, that fistful of, frankly, horse pill-sized vitamins that I've been taking on a daily basis attest to this continuation today, as does my avoidance of the charcuterie board, delicious cheeses and sushi, to give just a few examples. I am fine with it, I'm dealing with it, I have a plan for after the baby's born, put it that way. My choice in this have been influenced by the advice that's been given to me by the medical professionals who are caring for me, and also for the shared medical knowledge that exists within my wider community. And the same is precisely true for those who were living centuries ago. The major difference being the theoretical framework that is shaping the medical understanding and advice of the time. Once again, then, we must turn to the four humours to gain an understanding of what our early modern counterparts believed about healthy conception. I do have a video on the four humours that I will be leaving linked. As I've explained previously, according to humoral understanding, people were made up of four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Health required the appropriate balancing of these components. Ill health, or dis-ease, occurred at times of imbalance in them. It was thought that the natural disposition of men was to be humorally hot and dry, while women were cold and wet. Men were also thought to be the ideal form of the species, while women were not quite fully formed. The product, it was thought, of an improper heating in their mothers' wombs. Both women and men were understood to produce seed during sex. Thus, orgasms were thought by many to be necessary for both parties so they could provide the two seeds that would make conception possible. Indeed, John Pechey's A General Treatise of the Diseases of Maids, Bigbellied Women, Childbed Women and Widows, together with the best methods of preventing or curing the same, published in 1696, explains that, quote, conception is nothing else but an action of the womb, whereby the prolific seeds of the man and woman are there received and retained, that an infant may be engendered and formed out of it. An earlier text, The Expert Midwife by James Roof, which was translated into English from the original Latin in 1637, provides further context with regard to the states of these seeds. Roof asserts that, quote, yet although the mixture of these may be made equal, notwithstanding it is all out of doubt that the quality of them is not alike. For the seed of the man doth exceed the woman's seed in heat and thickness, which in comparison of man's seed is more moist and cold, and therefore also it is manifest that it is more waterish, yea, in respect of temperature. But nevertheless, although they differ so much in quality, the woman's seed doth yield and afford the like help and furtherance in framing the feature, that the seeds do mutually grow and increase at once together by the virtue of both of them. The seeds in question were thought by some to be made up of a combination of the four humours. Sex, therefore, was an act that could purge humours, and as such, it could act as a way to maintain health, even to cure sickness. One sickness in particular that was thought to be best remedied in the marital bed can be found if we return to John Pechey's text. There we learn that, quote, the green sickness is an ill habit of the body proceeding from obstructions. It is accompanied most commonly with a beating of the heart, difficulty of breathing, and a longing for absurd things, and an unfitness for motion, and other symptoms. The face and whole body are pale, and sometimes of a leaden and green colour. There is an inflation, and as it were a swelling upon the eyelids. The legs also swell, especially about the ankles. There is a heavy and often lasting pain of the head. The pulse is quick. The sick are drowsy and have an aversion for wholesome food. Lastly, the disease increasing and the obstructions being multiplied, a suppression of the courses at length follows, which shows the disease is confirmed. The courses here being the menstrual periods. The disease is most commonly not dangerous, but if it be neglected too much, it occasions great diseases, as hard swellings, a dropsy, and other grievous diseases which at length kill the patient. When the disease is small, and chiefly arises from obstructions of the veins of the womb, it is easily cured by marriage in young virgins. Those that have had this disease a long while are either barren, or bring forth children that are sickly and short-lived. Green sickness, as we've just seen, was a female affliction, one that could be best remedied by becoming a wife. If, though it was left untreated for too long, green sickness might prove catastrophic to a woman's life and to her capacity to ever conceive or bear children. If a couple found themselves encountering difficulties with conceiving, they may, if they could afford it, have sought the advice of a physician. And perhaps that physician might determine that it was the hopeful father who could benefit from a dietary change, one that might assist him in the production and nourishing of semen. To this end, warm and moist foods, like meat, or spices like pepper, were thought to be beneficial. Windy foods, like beans, were believed to have aphrodisiac properties for men. An explanation of female infertility can be found in the very first midwifery manual that was ever printed in English, This is The Birth of Mankind from 1540. This states that, quote, in women there may be 4 general causes by which the conception may be impeded and let, meaning prevented. Overmuch calidity or heat of the matrice, overmuch coldness, overmuch humidity or moistness, and overmuch dryness. Any of these 4 qualities exceeding temperancy may be sufficient causes to let due conception. The hopeful early modern mother must therefore strive to attain humoral balance in her own body, in order that she might create the most hospitable soil, shall we say, in which to plant the seeds that would, it was hoped, become her baby. And for many, the advice of a physician would have been thought to be the best way for such a woman to discover which, if any of her humours were in fact out of temperancy, and if they were, what should be done to remedy that. But say these treatments prove successful, and a pregnancy does develop, well, what then? Because our early modern mother can't simply pop down to her local chemist shop, as they're called in the UK, and pick up a pregnancy test, one that's been designed to detect the hormone human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG, in the urine, as we can today. Perhaps, though, as is frankly often the case today, the early modern woman's first sign of pregnancy would have been a late or missed period. And at this point, she might also have turned to look at her urine to provide further evidence. Because some believed that it was possible to recognise the urine of a pregnant woman by its pale colour and cloudy surface. Some said that a pregnant woman's urine could rust a needle that had been submerged within it, and or that it could change wine if it was mixed into it. Now, I have looked, but I have thus far been unable to find a reason why pregnancy would cause urine that could rust a needle. If you've got any ideas, please let me know. However, there are reasons why pregnancy might result in a cloudier urine sample. And it is possible that alcohol might have reacted in fairly specific ways to the proteins found in urine during pregnancy, which might possibly have been recognisable to an experienced eye. Nevertheless, I think it's fair to say that none of these are reliable tests. And so perhaps the clearest sign of pregnancy is going to be the quickening of the baby. The quickening refers to the time when a mother is first aware of their baby moving around inside of them. And speaking from experience, that sensation, that awareness, can take what feels like an awfully long time to appear. During my current pregnancy, I did become aware of these movements far earlier than I had in my first pregnancy. First time around, I had seen my baby twice, at my 12-week scan and then my 20-week scan, before I was ever aware that I was feeling him move. Even this time, I again saw my baby before I felt him. I saw him at my 12-week scan and I felt him for the first time a few weeks later. Now, I might be alone in this, but until I saw that baby wiggling about on the screen, the whole pregnancy didn't really feel real to me. And the quickening was, for me, the start of a daily reassurance that the whole thing was still real. And that realisation has led me to wonder, what must that multi-week wait have felt like for early modern women? I wonder, how often were they writing off baby movements as simply stomach rumbles or wind? Were there occasions when the reverse happened? Were there women who erroneously believed themselves to be pregnant and so believed that some other internal process was in fact their quickening? Could something like this have convinced Queen Mary I that, along with her other symptoms, she had in fact fallen pregnant in the second half of 1554, and that she would be delivered of that Roman Catholic heir to her throne in 1555? So what do you think of the early modern beliefs around sex and conception, about the differing experiences of trying to get pregnant between then and now, of the waiting and wondering that surely a number of mothers must have felt in the early months of their pregnancy? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comment section underneath this video. I would also love it if you could pop an emoji or a social glyph in the comments too, because that will boost the engagement. And the more engaged a video gets, the more YouTube says they share it out, and that should help us to grow this community. As we've been talking about conception, but we want to keep it clean, no aubergines here, maybe we do something to do with pregnancy and babies for emojis this time. You can also find me elsewhere on social media. I will leave links to all the places you can find me on the internet in my description box. Please do follow me over on some or all of those so we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, please share it with your friends. You can tell me you like this video in particular by hitting the thumbs up. Please do subscribe to the channel, and if you think you are subscribed, please have a little check now just to make sure YouTube hasn't mysteriously unsubscribed you against your will. That has been happening. While you are there, checking, subscribing, maybe resubscribing, please do hit the bell icon that sits beside the subscribe button and then select all in the drop down that will appear, and that way YouTube claims that they will tell you when I've next uploaded, but also when I am next going to go live, which I do to talk about the history news. And I know you're not going to want to miss that. There is now our failsafe. I have got a website. I will link it. It's www.katrinamarchant.com. When you're there, go to the contact page. On the contact page, you'll see a box. Please put your email address in that box. That will allow me to send you a message once a week to let you know what I've been up to, but also to send you useful links for my content for the coming days. I hope you're going to have a great day, whatever you're doing. And I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.